Warren Aldridge was standing ankle-deep in his own basement at 4 a.m., watching brown water pour steadily through a fresh crack in his foundation wall, when he realized the water wasn't coming from his own property at all. It was running downhill in a straight, unnatural line directly from his neighbor's freshly poured driveway next door. 3 months earlier, that driveway had been a modest strip of cracked asphalt. Now it was twice as wide, regraded, and sloped in a direction that sent every drop of rainwater straight at Warren's foundation instead of away from it, the way it always had for 20 years. Stay with Warren as one flooded basement unravels into the discovery that his neighbor, Craig Dunmore, had cut every corner imaginable to build that driveway. Corners that were about to cost him a great deal more than he ever expected to spend. Warren Aldridge was 57 years old, a retired structural engineer who had spent 30 years designing commercial buildings before retiring to the same modest 2-story house he and his late wife had bought young and never left. He knew grading and drainage the way most people know their own morning routine, which made the sudden, obvious redirection of water toward his foundation both easy for him to identify and deeply frustrating to watch happen in slow motion over a single rainy season. For 2 decades, the shared property line between Warren and his neighbor had followed a gentle, natural slope engineered into the original subdivision's drainage plan, water sheeting harmlessly across both yards toward a swale at the back of the block, exactly as the county's original grading certificate specified. Warren had the original plat map framed in his garage, a habit from his engineering days more than sentiment. Before we get into exactly how Craig Dunmore's driveway ended up costing him everything, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from today, because a flooded basement has a way of feeling personal no matter what part of the world you're in. Craig Dunmore, 51, had moved in 6 years earlier and spent most of that time slowly acquiring the kind of toys that required serious parking space. A travel trailer, a boat, and eventually a full-size RV he wanted to store beside his house instead of paying for off-site storage. His existing driveway, narrow and original to the subdivision, simply wasn't wide enough, and rather than pay for a proper engineered expansion, Craig decided to handle it himself with a low-bid contractor willing to skip a few steps most homeowners never think to ask about. To avoid the cost and delay of a county grading permit, Craig's contractor labeled the entire project driveway resurfacing on the paperwork, even though the actual work involved excavating and regrading nearly 8 feet beyond the original driveway's footprint, tilting the new slab's pitch in the opposite direction to keep water off Craig's own garage, sending it, instead, directly toward Warren's foundation. Warren approached Craig calmly after the first heavy rain revealed the problem, showing him water pooling visibly against the shared property line. "I think your new grading is sending water toward my foundation," Warren told him. Craig shrugged it off entirely. "It's just a driveway, Warren. Probably just a coincidence with the storm. I'm not about to tear up a project I just paid for over one bad rain." Warren, used to a lifetime of people underestimating drainage problems until they became expensive ones, let it go for the moment, hoping the next storm would prove less severe. Didn't. A second, smaller storm 2 weeks later produced the same pooling, this time visibly tracking along a slight channel in Craig's new asphalt that hadn't existed in the original driveway at all. A channel Warren suspected, correctly, had been intentionally graded that way to keep water off Craig's own garage slab. Warren, drawing on old professional habits, began documenting everything. Time-stamped photos of pooling water after every rain, a small rain gauge installed near the property line, and eventually a hairline crack that appeared along his basement's foundation wall exactly 6 weeks after the new driveway was poured, a crack that widened noticeably after the 3rd significant storm of the season. The 4th storm was the one that put Warren ankle-deep in his own basement at 4 in the morning, water pouring steadily through a foundation crack that had grown from hairline to nearly a 1/4 inch, ruining a finished basement, a decade of stored family photographs, and the furnace Warren had replaced only 2 years earlier. He spent that morning in rubber boots, ferrying waterlogged boxes up the basement stairs one at a time, stopping when he reached a plastic tub containing his late wife's old scrapbooks, several pages already soaked through and beginning to bleed ink across faded photographs of their wedding. He set that particular box aside on the highest, driest shelf he could find, and stood there for a long moment before going back down for the rest. Warren called Craig that same morning, standing in his ruined basement with his phone against his ear, and described the damage in plain terms. Craig's response stung more than the flooding itself. "That's rough, man, but I really don't think my driveway is the cause. Basements flood. It happens. Warren hung up without arguing further, and it was in that exact moment, more than any puddle or crack, that he decided this was no longer a conversation he was going to have informally. Warren hired a licensed hydrologist named Priya Chandran to conduct a formal drainage assessment, and her report confirmed exactly what Warren already suspected. Craig's regrade driveway had reversed the natural slope along the shared property line, redirecting an estimated additional 40% of stormwater runoff directly toward Warren's foundation during any significant rain event. Warren filed a formal complaint with the county building department, triggering a site inspection by an enforcement officer named Dale Whitcomb, who confirmed on site that the actual scope of work, excavation, regrading, and a footprint expansion of nearly 8 feet, should have required full permitting and drainage review, not the resurfacing exemption Craig's contractor had claimed. Warren filed a formal complaint with the county building department, triggering a site inspection by an enforcement officer named Dale Whitcomb, who confirmed on site that the actual scope of work, excavation, regrading, and a footprint expansion of nearly 8 feet, should have required full permitting and drainage review, not the resurfacing exemption Craig's contractor had claimed. Craig, informed of the violation notice, insisted the drainage issue was unrelated to his driveway and suggested Warren's foundation problems were simply due to the house's age, a claim that fell apart almost immediately once Dale compared the county's original 1998 grading certificate against Craig's new survey and found the slope direction along the shared boundary had been reversed by nearly 12 degrees. Digging further, Warren's attorney, a sharp property litigator named Marisol Fenning, discovered that the survey Craig submitted to support his no significant grading change claim had been signed by a surveyor named Gareth Loomis, a former college friend of Craig's, whose stamped measurements didn't match the physical elevation readings Priya had independently taken at the same points. Marisol subpoenaed Gareth's original field notes and found he had never actually visited the property a second time to verify the post-construction grade at all. He had simply reused elevation figures from his own earlier survey, years before the driveway expansion, and signed off on them as current, a favor for a friend that had just become a serious professional liability. In his deposition, Gareth admitted Craig had called him directly, described the situation as just a formality to speed up the permit process, and offered to pay him his standard survey fee for what Gareth understood, at the time, to be a quick paperwork favor rather than an actual reinspection. "I should have driven out there," Gareth told the state board investigator. "I told myself the numbers probably hadn't changed that much. I was wrong, and I knew I was cutting a corner when I did it." While reviewing the project for the code enforcement case, Dale Whitcomb noticed something else that had nothing to do with Warren's foundation at all. Craig's low-bid contractor had skipped the compacted gravel base layer required under county code for a slab that size, pouring the new asphalt directly over loosely backfilled soil, a shortcut that, combined with the improper grading, meant the driveway itself was already showing early signs of subsurface erosion and settling less than 4 months after installation. If you've ever dealt with a neighbor who dismissed a real problem as just a coincidence, you already know how satisfying the next part of this story is going to feel. And if that's the kind of payoff you come back for, this is a great moment to hit subscribe before the verdict lands. At the county code enforcement hearing, Marisol presented Priya's drainage assessment, the mismatched survey elevations, Gareth's admission that he'd never re-inspected the property, and Dale's structural findings on the missing gravel base, laying out, piece by piece, a project built on shortcuts at every single stage. The county's hearing officer ruled decisively. Craig's driveway expansion violated grading and drainage code. The resurfacing permit exemption had been fraudulently claimed, and the entire expanded section would need to be fully removed and regraded to restore the original 1998 drainage certificate specifications. Not patched, not adjusted, but completely torn out and rebuilt correctly from the base layer up. The twist arrived when Priya's follow-up inspection, conducted as part of the court-ordered remediation review, found that the missing gravel base and improper compaction had already caused enough subsurface erosion that a significant section of the driveway was structurally unsound regardless of the drainage violation. Meaning, even if Craig had somehow won the drainage dispute, his own contractor's shortcuts would have forced a full replacement within another year or two anyway. Craig was ordered to fully remove and properly rebuild the driveway to code, pay for Warren's complete foundation repair and basement remediation, cover Priya's and Marisol's professional fees, and pay civil damages for the property loss caused by the flooding, including a separate line item for the water-damaged photographs and keepsakes the court accepted could never truly be replaced. Gareth Loomis faced a formal complaint to the State Surveying Board for the falsified post-construction survey, resulting in a suspension of his license pending review and a requirement to complete continuing education hours before he could resume independent practice. When every figure was totaled, the combined judgment against Craig and the contractor's insurance reached $164,000. Craig's replacement driveway, built properly this time with full permitting, a compacted gravel base, and correct drainage sloping away from both properties, ended up narrower than his original illegal expansion, just enough for his existing vehicles, with the RV finally moved to an off-site storage lot he'd been trying to avoid paying for in the first place. Months later, Warren stood in his fully repaired basement, dry for the first time in nearly a year, watching rain sheet harmlessly across both yards toward the original swale exactly the way it had for 20 years before Craig ever picked up a phone to call a low-bid contractor. Warren told a local reporter following up on the county's enforcement case that he never once wanted to ruin his neighbor's weekend hobby. He'd only ever wanted the water to go where it was supposed to go. What surprised him most, he said, wasn't the flooding itself, but how much simpler and cheaper the whole thing would have been for everyone if Craig had just believed him the first time he pointed at the puddle. If you've ever had someone try to weaponize against you, leave a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it ended. And if you enjoyed the story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.